All right, let's dive into this material on community integrated agricultural development in Africa. I got to admit, when I first saw the title, I was picturing like tractors and irrigation, the tech side of things.
Yeah, makes sense.
But this course, it's like it pulled back the curtain on a whole different world. It's less about the hardware and way more, the human software, like the trust between neighbors, the stories they share, all that stuff that doesn't show up on a spreadsheet.
And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? You can have all the fancy tech in the world, but if you don't have that underlying social fabric, it's like, what's the point?
Yeah. The course even uses this analogy. It's like airdropping a high-tech tractor into a field. Nobody knows how to drive it.
Or even why they should.
Exactly. It's all about that foundation.
That's where this idea of social capital comes in, right? Like, that's the fertile ground that allows everything else to grow.
Social capital. Okay, I'll admit, that sounds a little jargony at first, but the way they explain it, it's like, think about the bonds you have with your neighbors, the people you trust, the ones you'd lend a helping hand twice. That's social capital in action.
It's like, who do you go to for advice when you need it? Who can you rely on in a crisis?
Or even just, who are you willing to share your prize-winning tomato seeds with?
Exactly. Because you trust them, you know they'll do right by you. And that trust, it's a powerful thing. The course even argues that in many forms of capital, like it has real value for communities, especially when it comes to facing challenges, whether it's a natural disaster or a changing climate or just, everyday life stuff.
And the flip side is those cautionary tales of projects that just, crash and burn because nobody bothered to build those relationships, tap into those existing. They tried to build a house on sand.
And that's where this whole idea of local knowledge comes into play, which the course spends a ton of time on.
Okay, yeah. At first I thought they were just talking about like old farming techniques.
Right, like folklore or something.
Yeah. But they take it way deeper. It's about respecting the knowledge systems that have allowed communities to thrive, often against incredible odds.
It's like those communities, they hold a wealth of knowledge that's often overlooked by outsiders. But if you actually take the time to listen and learn, it can be incredibly valuable.
Totally. And you know what example really blew my mind? They talk about how traditional farming practices in the Andes, the ones that have centuries, they're actually contributing to preserving biodiversity.
It's amazing, right?
It's like, who knew that these age-old practices were holding the key to something so crucial for the entire planet? And, with climate change and everything, that's not just some feel-good story. That's essential knowledge.
Absolutely. And it really challenges notions of what constitutes expertise, right?
Big time. It's not just about what you learn in the lab. It's about the wisdom that's embedded in communities, in their practices, in their very way of life. It's like, we talk about the importance of biodiversity, but here are these communities who've been living it, breathing it, for generations.
Right. They're not just conserving biodiversity.
Exactly. It's not some abstract concept. It's their lifeline, which makes you think, how do we learn from that? How do we take that ancient wisdom and, weave it together with modern science and technology?
Yeah, because it's not about choosing one or the other, right? It's about finding those points of intersection where they can work together.
Totally. It talks about how some of the most promising agricultural innovations are coming from blending those two worlds, traditional knowledge and cutting-edge science.
Absolutely. And it requires a real shift in perspective, right? Like moving away from this idea that experts always come from outside the community with all the answers.
Oh, like those "we're here to help" parachute projects.
Exact course really challenges that approach. It emphasizes the need to involve communities every step of the way, from identifying the challenges to designing the solutions.
Okay, so that brings us to those participatory tools we were talking about, SWOT analysis and PRA.
Ah, yes. The dynamic duo of community engagement.
All right, I first saw SWOT analysis in this context. I was like, wait a minute, is this a business school flashback?
Right. You don't usually associate it with community development. But it makes so much sense when you think about it.
It does. Because every community, every group, they have their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It's just like analyzing a company, only way more human.
Way more impactful, potentially. Like the course talks about how SWOT analysis was used in this village in Nepal to help them manage their forest resources more sustainably. They identified their strengths, like they had this deep traditional knowledge of medicinal plants. And their weaknesses, they had limited access to markets. And by looking at the opportunities and threat with a plan to create a community-owned enterprise that would allow them to benefit from their knowledge and resources.
So instead of some outside agency coming in and saying, here's how you manage your forest, they're like, hey, what assets do you already have? And how can we leverage those?
Exactly. It's about empowerment, ownership. It's about recognizing that communities often have the solutions with it. They just need the space and the support to unlock that potential.
Okay, that's SWOT analysis. Now, what about this PRA thing? Participatory Rural Appraisal. Sounds a little intimidating.
It's not as complicated as it sounds. Essentially, it's a set of tools and techniques that are designed to empower communities to analyze their own situation, their own solutions.
So instead of relying on outside experts to gather data and make recommendations.
You're putting the tools directly in the hands of the people who are most affected.
Okay, I can see how that would be powerful, but I'm still a little fuzzy on the how. Like, what does this actually look like in practice? Give me an example.
Sure. The course talks about how PRA was used in the issue of open defecation, which was a major health hazard. So instead of just coming in with pre-designed latrines and expecting people to use them, they used PRA to understand the local context. Like, they had community members create maps of where they went to the bathroom.
Wait, hold on. People were cool with, like, drawing maps of where they pooped.
Well, it's all about respectful space for dialogue, right? And using methods that are culturally appropriate. So maybe it wasn't so much about drawing literal maps, but more about having conversations, understanding the social norms, the beliefs, the barriers that were preventing people from using latrines.
Okay, so it's about uncovering those hidden obstacles that you wouldn't necessarily see just by looking at...
Exactly. And once they understood those barriers, they were able to work with the community to design sanitation solutions that were both culturally sensitive and effective. And the results were incredible. They saw a significant increase in latrine use, which led to a dramatic decrease in diarrheal diseases.
Wow, that's amazing. And all because they actually listen to the community to understand their perspective.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that communities have a wealth of knowledge and experience, and that by tapping into that, we can achieve far more sustainable and equitable outcomes.
It's like that saying, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. But what we're talking about here, hey, this guy already knows how to fish, maybe even better than we do. Let's figure out how to support him.
Exactly. It's about recognizing and valuing the existing expertise within communities.
And okay, let's get real for a second. I'm sure some folks listening are thinking, this is all super inspiring, but I work in an office, not a village. What am I supposed to do with this?
That's the goals, that they're not confined to rural development or agriculture. They're about understanding how groups of people work together, how to tap into collective wisdom, how to build something sustainable from the ground up. And that's relevant no matter where you are or what you do.
So it's like the setting might change a boardroom instead of a rice paddy, but the underlying principle...
Exactly. Think about it. We're constantly surrounded by these communities, right? Our families, our workplaces, even our online networks. And each of those groups has its own unique dynamics, its own forms of social capital, its own local knowledge.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. So if someone's sitting at their desk, listening to this and thinking, all right, I want to try this whole community, where do they even begin?
Well, I'd say the first step is simply awareness. Start noticing the invisible threads of social capital in your own life. Like, who do you turn to for advice at work? Who can you rely on to have your back when things get tough? That's social capital in action.
Right. Or even just a stressful day. That's valuable too.
Absolutely. It's all part of that social fabric. And once you start noticing it, you can start thinking about how to nurture it, how to make it stronger. Because the stronger those connections are, the more resilient your team, your community will be in the face of challenges.
It's like investing in relationships, but on a bigger scale.
Exactly. And just like X time and effort, but the payoff can be huge.
Okay, that's step one, awareness. What about step two? Where do those participatory tools come in?
Well, think about it this way. How do you usually gather information or make decisions within your team or organization? Is it mostly top-down, with the boss calling all the shots? Or is there collaboration and input from everyone?
Right, because I'm guessing you're about to suggest we try something a little more participatory.
Maybe just a little. Because even if you're not literally mapping out a village, you can use the principles of PRA to create a more inclusive and equitable decision-making process. Let's say you're trying to improve communication instead of sending out another one of those boring surveys that nobody reads, why not try a visual mapping exercise? Get everyone in a room, give them some sticky notes, and ask them to share their ideas.
Oh, I love that. It's visual, it's interactive, it gets people thinking outside the box.
Exactly. And it allows those quieter voices to be heard, not feel comfortable speaking up in a traditional meeting.
It's about creating that space where everyone feels valued, like their perspective matters.
Exactly. And that in itself can be incredibly empowering. And often it leads to more creative and sustainable solutions because you're tapping into the collective wisdom of the group.
So it's not just about applying these specific techniques, adopting a new mindset, right? One that's less about me and more about we.
Beautifully put. It's about recognizing that we're all in this together, and that by working together, by leveraging our collective wisdom and experience, we can achieve amazing things.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners a lot to chew on today. Of social capital to the importance of local knowledge to those practical tools that can help us build stronger, more resilient communities no matter where we are in the world.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another exploration into the world of ideas and innovations that are shaping